Part 2. Can we save the tiger? Tigers are big, and they're beautiful, and they're fierce, and all this makes life difficult for them these days. Because they're big, they need a lot of space, but the countries where they live, like India and Indonesia, have huge numbers of people in them too, all trying to make a living and all needing to be fed. And because they're beautiful, people have always hunted them for their skins. They also kill them for their bones and meat to use as medicines. And because tigers are fierce, they don't mix very well with humans. They usually eat deer and antelope and other wild animals, but when there are people nearby, they may end up eating farm animals like cows, sheep, and goats instead. Sometimes, though hardly ever, some tigers, usually old or sick ones, end up eating people too. So, if you were a poor farmer trying to make a living with a couple of cows and a few goats, you might not be too happy if you found there was a hungry tiger living nearby. And if you knew that someone might pay you more for a tiger skin and some bones than you could earn in 3 whole months working in the fields, then you might find it very tempting to set a trap or two, even if you knew it was against the law. Perhaps it's not too surprising that there aren't that many tigers left. There are many other animals that are running out of room, including these ones. The Asian elephant, Elephas maximus is its scientific name. It's found in South and Southeast Asia. The sloth bear, Melursus ursinus, again, that's the scientific name. It's found in South Asia. Here is another animal whose population is dwindling, the African hunting dog, or Lycaon pictus, again, the scientific name. It is found, you guessed it, in Africa. But not all endangered species need lots of space. Take Partula snails. They're tiny, so small that one of them could happily spend its whole life in a medium-sized toothbrush. And they're not at all scary. But like tigers, they're in big trouble, although nobody really meant to give them a hard time. Partula snails. Partula, over 120 species. Where is it found? Islands in the Pacific Ocean, especially in French Polynesia, where there were originally 63 species. Now only 5 of these are left in the wild, while 11 others survive in zoos. The rest are extinct. The size? Less than 1 inch long. They live up to 5 years. They live in trees and bushes. Each snail produces 1 live baby every 6 to 8 weeks. And what do they eat? They eat plants. So they are herbivores. Partula snails live on islands in the Pacific Ocean, miles from anywhere. There are lots of different kinds, and they've been here for millions of years. When the first people arrived on the islands hundreds of years ago, the Partula snails didn't seem to mind too much and just got on with their lives, feeding on leaves in the forest. Then, about 100 years ago, people brought a different kind of snail to the islands. This was the giant African land snail. They brought it because it's good to eat. It makes especially delicious snail soup, and it is very easy to look after. The giant African land snail took too well to the islands, and soon there were tons of them, many more than anyone wanted to eat. And it turned out that they had pretty healthy appetites themselves. Soon they were chomping their way through people's crops as if there was no tomorrow. Something had to be done. This is a picture of the giant African land snail, or Actina folica, scientific name. And it's found originally in East Africa, now in different parts of the world, including Asia, South America, the West Indies, and islands in the Pacific Ocean. When this was brought over to the islands in these different areas, it became an invasive species. Unfortunately, what people decided to do was to introduce a third kind of snail. This one was called the Rosie uglandina, and its favorite food was other snails. The idea was that the Rosie uglandina would feed on the giant African land snails and stop them from eating everyone's crops. This worked a bit, but not that well. There are still plenty of the giant snails in the islands. The problem was that the Rosie uglandinas thought that the Partula snails, which weren't doing anyone any harm, were the most delicious snack and quickly started eating them all up instead. Now there are hardly any Partula snails at all. Some kinds have become extinct, some now live only in zoos, and a few still hang on in places that the Rosie uglandina hasn't managed to reach yet. The Rosie uglandina, Euglena rosea, the scientific name. It's originally found in Florida, now introduced to French Polynesia, New Guinea, Hawaii, the Philippine Islands, and other islands in the Pacific Ocean. Clearly, it has become an invasive species. Here are a few more endangered animals. The quokka, Satanis baccharis, scientific name. It's found in Australia. It's attacked by foxes and cats. Then they have the Mariana fruit dove, Tilinopus roseacapia. It's found in the Mariana Islands and the Pacific Ocean. Now it's extinct on the island of Guam. It's attacked by brown tree snakes. We have here the ground iguana, Caiclura. There's 9 different species. It's found in the West Indies. It's attacked by cats, dogs, pigs, rats, and mongooses. And these are only affected by predators that have been introduced by people. So these 3 particular animals are attacked by invasive species. In other words, species that had not been a part of the food chain or food web previously. Humans brought them to these areas, and they have had a terrible effect on the populations of the quokka, the Mariana fruit dove, and ground iguanas, and I'm sure many more animals.